French Revolution was inspired by the American Revolution. I chose to do this as my project because I was fascinated with the history of the French since I first visited France on a school trip on my junior year of high school. I went back again 2 years later after taking a year of French and learning more about the culture and its history from this time period. I was also able to visit the Palace of Versailles, where the last king and queen of France lived, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. This is an image of the palace gardens and a fountain in front of the palace. A problem or challenge. Part of the conflict within the French Revolution was that the country was in debt because the previous king, King Louis XV, had spent his money uncontrollably, and so did his predecessors. His son, the Dauphin, King Louis XVI, and the Dauphine, Queen Marie Antoinette of Austria. As for the people of France, agriculturally, the nation was starving and left poor, which would eventually lead up to the violence and the rioting. Here is a painting of the capture of the Bastille, which was basically the storming of the Bastille, symbolizing the start of the French Revolution on July 14, 1789. Here is a group of Parisian revolutionaries seizing the Bastille prison in a dramatic form of protest against the king. Now the monarchy will be overthrown by the French civilian people, who were already guillotining French nobles at the center square in the capital. Finally, they would get their victory once the king and queen were executed. This will then follow the rule of General Napoleon Bonaparte until his intentions are seen too dictator-like and the French become a democratic republic. This will continue into what can be seen today in its modern-day government. Similarities to the American Revolution. At the bottom left corner here is the royal flag of France. This flag would be flown along the Palace of Versailles, for example, to signify the royal monarchy that was present. The French and American Revolution had some similarities in its formation. The colonists left the land of Britain to begin a society of their own and run it their own way instead of continuing to obey the orders of the monarchy. However, the French broke away from their monarchy in a much more brash way that was very risky and could have backfired on the French civilians. Both the U.S. and France celebrate their country in July. The U.S. on the 4th since 1776 and the French on July 14th, 1789. Since the French Revolution followed after years of the American Revolution, the flag of France now partially resembles the past colonial flag of America. It also has its colored lines opposite of the Netherlands flag, which is identical, only it goes horizontal instead of the French lines go vertical. This is the most important takeaway that everyone has to remember. Who was executed, who lived, and who took over new leadership? The top two images are of the Queen Marie Antoinette and George Danton, an advocate who was a leader earlier in the French Revolution. He was guillotined in 1794 because he opposed the Reign of Terror, which went from 1759 to 1794. Although he was in favor of overthrowing the king and queen and having them executed, he too was guillotined by his former advocates. King Louis would be tried and convicted for high treason, be executed by guillotine on January 21st, 1793. at the peak of the French Revolution. 9 months later, Marie Antoinette was convicted of treason and, like her husband, was guillotined on October 16, 1793. Marie-Therese is known as the only long-term remaining survivor of her family lineage, since her brother Louis-Joseph died at age 7 weeks before the storm of the Bastille, and her other brother Louis-Charles died at age 10 after the French Revolution in prison. She was released from prison just before her 17th birthday, after the end of the Reign of Terror in December of 1795. She went to her mother's homeland of Austria, married her cousin, and later lived a couple years in exile in Great Britain, until returning to France in 1814 after Napoleon had resigned his position. Following the Bourbon Restoration, she continued to flee France multiple times and spent the rest of her life in exile after being queen for only 20 minutes because her husband resigned. She died at age 72 in October 1851 in what is now considered Slovenia. Here is the French President Emmanuel Macron. He has taken office since May 14, 2017. According to the Constitution of the Fifth Republic, the nation declares itself to be an indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic. They work as a semi-presidential system since they also have a prime minister, Jean Castex. Although both the US and France have a president, it doesn't function the same way, since in the US the president is both the head of state and the leader of the government. France is a republic, which means it's a constitutional monarchy, because it is a formal monarchy in which the sovereign exercises authority in accordance with what's written or removed from the Constitution. Originally, the Bastille was a prison where political prisoners were held, as well as citizens detained and placed on trial, were based on direct order of the king. It also began to symbolize the harsh rule of the Bourbon monarchy. It is more greatly known as the beginning of the French Revolution, hence why France celebrates its nation on what is called Bastille Day, La Fête Nationale, le 14 Juillet. This holiday commemorates the end of the ancient regime and what began on this day. This French Constitution was created by the National Assembly during the French Revolution. The new system was restricted by requiring citizens to pay a certain amount in taxes, which meant 2/3 of adult males had the right to vote. This did not last for even a year. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, 1789, was made to establish firm rules and regulations for those placed in a position to lead, and the common French citizen. One of the articles specifies how someone who takes a leadership role in government should be elected. It cannot be just anyone who assumes the position. In order to protect the country from being overthrown again. In July of 1830, French aristocrats who held a high class in society wrote against the bourgeois, who were the middle class, but also a part of capitalist society. They were known for owning most of society's wealth and production. The bourgeois wanted to put all the blame on the middle class for France's economic fails, and it did achieve making the aristocracy look bad. Allies with France and the US. The US and the French continue to have a strong relationship with one another. Since their support in both countries' revolutions, they have also been allies in both World War I and World War II. France also helped the United States in the 9/11 terrorist attacks to recover. Today, our nation's presidents have kept in frequent contact with one another, with meetings to continue to encourage one another and leading the country. Here are my sources that I use. My two primary sources were from History.com, and my other one was from the American Yacht. Some of my secondary sources were from Encyclopedia Britannica and Avalon Project.